Hello, once again, Niner Faithful. Today is Tuesday, July 27th, and welcome to another episode of the JFA Podcast. As you notice, Adam's not with us. If you saw our show last Saturday, you know he is at a high school right now speaking to a group of high school students about self respect. Fabulous thing he's doing. So he cannot be with us this morning. Hopefully, as the morning goes along, we will get Jason Hurley in here. He is the 49ers cap guru. I think he's been dealing with some COVID, possibly flu. So he's a little late in coming in this morning. So we bumped the show a little bit. Hopefully, he'll be jumping in with us, but there's a lot of stuff to talk about. There's been a lot of moves around the NFL. There's been some news on the defensive coordinator front, some news as far as some free agents and some unexpected guys released that the 49ers may have some interest in. But we're going to talk about all this and more. You're inside the Johnny Dell's Football Academy. What is going on, everybody? So awesome to see all the people in the channel and on the chat. We're going to get kicked off this morning talking about some defensive coordinator news. It's been the big thing. I got to straighten out my hat a little bit. It's bugging me. But as you know, we love to boost the algorithm. So if you are watching live, you can hit hashtag JD49. It's a free way to support the channel. It's a free way to support what we're doing. It helps the algorithm for YouTube. YouTube is an algorithm based channel, so people will see things based upon positive interaction. And so if you're interacting in the comments of live shows, then it tends to say, hey, people like it. Let me show it to somebody else and people that are just like you. So comment in there, hashtag JD49. Let's boost the algorithm. Also, if you're catching us live, is because you have your notifications turned on and your YouTube notifications. A lot of people don't have, and I can see the analytics on the YouTube side. A lot of people don't have the YouTube app notifications turned on their phone. So you may be going, I'm not getting these notifications. Well, you have to allow YouTube to notify you in its app. And then you also have to have your notifications for that channels turned on so that you will be alerted when a video like this goes live. But there's a lot of people in the chat that are already getting in. We're going to talk about it. Is it Staley? I don't know. The lovely, beautiful, talented Dawn Dell is here. That is my wife. She's amazing. She was a trooper. She drove for over an hour home yesterday after my son had thrown up in the car with the smell of it all. If you know, you know. Barry's here, Marcos, Technicic, Randy, Gammon, I see you there. It's the off season. Yeah. I don't have a lot of archive tape on Drew Brees. I don't have access to anything past 2022. I lost that. So when the NFL redid NFL Game Pass, like you used to be able to have all the way back to 2011, I think it was 2010, where it was really easy to access and you could get everything in one video as one game tape, or else I would be going back and grabbing a lot of Drew Brees stuff. When they redid NFL Game Pass, I believe that was in 2021, a lot of that interface was lost. They completely broke the coach's film side of it. And I, as an idiot, did not save a lot of that stuff that was going, or else I would be doing a Drew Brees comparison video. I'm going to be reaching out to NFL Films and seeing what I can get through them. But yeah, or else that would be happening. I am working on the route tree breakdown video, the parts 2 and 3, might even be part 4. I started working on part 2, and I was going to do mostly inside release stuff, and I got to 40 routes and was like, I probably need to split this up. And so it's been kind of a chore of figuring out exactly how I'm going to split that up, because some deeper routes tie into so many things. You can't talk about one deeper route without talking about the 5 underneath routes that are based off that. And so it's, what do you keep? How do I work short or deep to short? And then I'm kind of having to backtrack on a couple of those or not. So that's what's been the hang up in releasing that video. That is on our members website. I have part 1 at the members website, jfa49.com right now. I see Lisa in there. Khalil, yeah, we're going to talk about Shaq Barrett. That's an interesting situation there. I've been diving into some of the numbers on that. It's an interesting look. The English Niners here. Uh, Welcome aboard from across the pond. I'm assuming you're across the pond, as we like to say. The colonies say hi. So, Connie's here and Dr. Steve Brule. So we're going to get into a lot of it. There's been a few guys that we know have been interviewed by Kyle, and the news is that he's going to also conduct two outside interviews this week. So, what does that mean as far as everything? I think the internal candidates, again, I think that was what many people were expecting, that there was going to be some internal candidates. I think a lot of people had the idea of Chris Kasurik because he's just he's a well-known coach on the defensive side. And so the question starts becoming, does he want to be a defensive coordinator, a la like a Jim Schwartz who starts out in D line and then goes into defensive coordinator, and he's also a guy who's really highly regarded. So there's a lot of respect that comes with his name. Is he a guy that wants to be a defensive coordinator? We don't know, and Kyle has said he's had those conversations with Chris, and he may just be a guy who that's not his fit. There's an old saying I remember when I was in college and taking some administrative leadership courses that people were talking about is you have to be careful not to promote somebody to failure, and that's what we tend to do. We promote somebody to the point of failure, and that is. If you're a fan of The Office, which I think a lot of us love The Office, Michael Scott as his original character was written as that, as somebody who was promoted to the point of failure, where he was an amazing salesperson, a great salesperson, terrible manager, right? Because what happens when you succeed really, really well? Well, then you get promoted. And so Michael Scott is a fantastic, amazing salesperson, gets promoted, and he's a terrible manager. So and that's sadly too often the case with a lot of guys, is that they get promoted into failure, and then they reach a dead end, and have to start over after that point. And they said great companies will find a way to keep somebody in their golden zone where you actually do not promote them past their point of success. And is Chris Kasurik that guy? Jim Tomsula may be a guy like that. Although I don't know, he just won the championship there in NFL Europe, so maybe there was some more issues there. I also don't think that Trent Baalke was doing too great of a job there at that time either. Some of the drafts and free agent guys that he was bringing in, I remember it was the tackle Piers that he brought in was absolutely terrible. But um, you know, is this a point where Chris Kasurik is just not going to be the defensive coordinator guy? And that's totally fine. If he is a guy who is where he's at and is really, really good at where he's at, and he doesn't think he might thrive in a position where suddenly he's not just looking at offensive line and matchup schemes and teaching defensive linemen stuff. He's now got to teach coaches how to teach a system that it's a very different, it's a big jump. People automatically assume, and we're going to talk about this a little bit, Brandon Staley, that the jump from some positions to the next is just the natural progression. But there's a completely different skill set that comes along with moving up in the coaching chain, and that's why some guys can be extremely brilliant. Some of your best minds in football are not your head coaches. Some of the best minds in football are some of these assistants who are maybe bringing up ideas and things to their coordinator or to their head coach that they had never thought about. But do they have the skills to lead people and do that sort of stuff? They're able to thrive in that position because they're able to focus all their energy into one very specific thing or a few specific things. And now they're tasked with, when you go from being a defensive line coach to a defensive coordinator, now you're not just receiving an assignment from a defensive coordinator of, okay, we need to look at all of their protection packages on third down and bring me an idea and bring me some options of what we can do to attack their protection packages and their protection packages for empty sets and their protection packages when they have two tight ends in. You're not just looking at that, you're having to assimilate that information, hand that job off to somebody else, assimilate that within what the defensive backs coach is talking about as far as 3-by-1 sets and bunch sets and 3-by-1 with the slot stacked, or with a flex tight end, and they're having to look at all of those things now as well, incorporate that, and then how that brings the coverage into the front end, and then they're having to install the rules on all that and teach the defensive back coach and the linebackers coach and the defensive line coach and then all the other assistants and be able to divvy out who's looking at what and figure out who is really good at seeing certain things, because you're going to have all these different things. Who's really good at charting 1st and 10? Who's really good at charting 3rd and short and figuring out that kind of stuff? So there's a lot of other assignments that go into this than just, I'm a really good coach who understands and has a really good understanding of football. It's how much information can you bring in, how well can you digest it, assimilate it, hand off assignments to other guys, and still be able to function in that. And I think it's just as equally a big of a jump when you go from a coordinator to a head coach. And so just because guys don't function as well as a head coach or as a coordinator doesn't mean that they can't be a really good assistant coach in some way or as a coordinator. So when it comes to a Chris Kasurik, I start getting the feeling that it's something along that route. Let me know what you think in the chat. Do you think that Chris Kasurik is being held back, or do you think maybe that's kind of the direction that it's going? The other part we're looking at is that the two guys who are being looked at in house are Nick Sorensen and Daniel Bullock. And now Nick Sorensen, you may remember the name. He was a safety, but he's been a defensive passing game specialist. I think a lot of people, again, also thought of Chris Kasurik because of how, Kyle's words coming out of the season in, how we use our linebackers, and then Robert Sala being a linebackers coach and D'Amico Ryans being the linebackers coach. You think about the front. And so we think about Chris Kasurik, but the two guys that they're looking at in-house, Daniel Bullock and Nick Sorensen, are both secondary guys and passing game guys. So Nick Sorensen has been the defensive passing game specialist and the nickel set specialist, assistant for the 49ers, and he's got a lot of coaching experience. He's got a lot of football experience. The other guy they're looking at is Daniel Bullock, who is currently defensive backs coach, and before that, he was the safeties coach. I think this actually does make sense if we really start, and it's something that I talked about after Steve Wilkes was fired, and I went through Kyle Shanahan's some of the words he had out of his conference call with reporters about it and what went into that decision. And then I showed some clips from the Super Bowl. It was quite painful. That there was a situation where that you had. Sorry, I just had a brain fart because I was looking at some other stuff and I was trying to make sure that everything was working fine on my end. But you have a situation where, Fred Warner was and Dre Greenlaw were being asked to do things in coverage that they weren't necessarily really used to doing. For example, there was one of the key 3rd downs in the game, and I showed the tape of it that the Chiefs knew the 49ers were going to be in man coverage. They ran a mesh concept, and they had Kelsey isolated to the single receiver side of a 3-by-1 set, and he's isolated on Fred Warner, and Fred Warner is having to play Travis Kelsey in a two-way go. That is not a situation you want to put your middle linebacker in. I don't care if it's Fred Warner. I don't care if it's Ray Lewis. I don't care if it's Patrick Willis, who, big deal, just got uh, uh, voted into the Pro Football Hall of Fame, very deservingly so. I've talked about that a number of times on this channel. But you don't want any linebacker having to play Travis Kelsey in a two-way go on a crucial 3rd down in the game. It was, I mean, if the 49ers stopped them, then they won the Super Bowl. And in that crucial moment, you have Fred Warner playing a two-way go on Travis Kelsey. That's not a winning situation at all. And then he's got to play it through traffic because they know you're going to be running man coverage. That's part of the issues that we saw all year long. And I kept going back to this. I showed this a number of times throughout the year that I started to get concerned with the 49ers defense and Steve Wilkes. I wasn't like, okay, we need to fire Steve Wilkes, because I'm not a fan of dismissing coordinators midseason. I think that's usually a panic button move. And, you know, why were you not sure about this at this point, as opposed to you had all off season to evaluate and look at things? So I'm not a fan of moving on from coordinators, and it wasn't like Steve Wilkes, like the defense was horrible, but there were some concerns, and one of those, and I brought it up in the first Arizona game because we were having a hard time getting Arizona off the field. And there was a play in particular, it was a mesh concept. We got picked against man because I started to see that Steve Wilkes was getting really predictable as far as man coverage and not having, either banjo or checks against bunches and stacks against that, and a lot of teams were running mesh concepts on him, and it's really started in that Arizona game that Arizona was able to get a big third down in that game, keep a like it was like a 16 play drive going off a mesh concept, and it was one of those moments that I remembered very succinctly of, okay, mm, I don't like that. This is not being beat by personnel. You were being beat by scheme. And it showed up a number of times through the year. When we did do it really well was when we could bait teams into thinking we were in man, they would run a mesh and we would hit him with zone. We were successful with that a number of times. Got a big pick six against the Cardinals. This in the second game, that was Mooney Ward had a pick six on that. That was a zone, and they ran that mesh concept. We were able to defeat it. When you look at the last fourth down attempt that the Lions had in the NFC Championship game, mesh concept. We showed man coverage pre-snap. They run that mesh. We're into zone. We've trapped it. Ends in fourth down. Then you get to the Super Bowl and you show man, they run mesh, and you get beat. It's one of those of, okay, why is this happening here? Why did you kind of get it then, and then now we're shying away from this? And so there's, some things there I think make sense as far as defensive backs coaches that they're going to be looking at how do we make sure that we're not putting Fred Warner in a two-way go on Travis Kelsey in the biggest game of the year. And so that's an interesting look at there. Now, I think the leading candidate outside of the facility is Brandon Staley. I think it would be erroneous of the 49ers to not interview Brandon Staley. And I've been seeing some interesting pushback from people. It seems like everybody's looked at what the Chargers did this year and how they ended last year and said, absolutely not. I want nothing to do with Brandon Staley. So as I'm going to reach over here and grab my coffee and get a little morning beverage, let me know in the chat. Are you give me a thumbs up if you got an emoji there for Brandon Staley, or a thumbs down against Brandon Staley, or um, pick an emoji of choice if you want. If you're not sure how you feel on that, I'm going to be grabbing my coffee like a fool. I said it far away from me. Okay. Finally, somebody popped in the chat. I was getting worried. I'm like, am I coming through to everybody? David Johnson, he says he'd be good with Brandon Staley. So this is Dr. Steve. He's he's got the poop emoji. Says I'm taking that as he's not sure about it. Technician, not sure. Hugh says I think Staley would be good. And my wife says she feels whatever decision I have. So, hey, I like that. Barry says he wants to keep it in house. He wants to see an internal promotion. Marcos, he's not sure. So, um, and the big question would be would having Brandon Staley help convince Joey Bosa to come over so we can have the Bosa brothers. I don't know. Another one in house. We're seeing there Bill Belichick. Okay. Okay. Yeah, I keep seeing this floating around, and I've tried to do my part in squashing this. I do not see Bill Belichick wanting to be a defensive coordinator for somebody else. Understand, this is a guy who, for 24 years, was head coach and general manager. He has answered to no one but Robert Kraft for 24 years. He is 70 years old. He has not had to answer to somebody since he was 46 years old. Okay? So, like, imagine you're the greatest Head coach, you've won more Super Bowls than any other head coach in history. You have not had to answer to a boss other than your owner, who has essentially given you free reign for over 20 years. You're 70 and you haven't had a boss since you were in your mid 40s, and you're going to go and work under John Lynch, under Kyle Shanahan as a defensive coordinator, and you won 6 Super Bowls as a head coach. I don't see that happening. I'm pretty sure Bill Belichick would rather go sit in an analyst booth for a while, maybe be a defensive analyst, like contractor, like consultant situation. I could see that, like what Vic Fangio did last year. Um, I don't see him saying, I'm going to go and put in 70 hours a week working for a boss across the country from where I've lived for 24 years. I don't see that happening. So I think Bill Belichick is the most least likely candidate other than Nick Saban, who would be in the exact same situation. Like if we're dreaming of a guy, Nick Saban would be a better fit for me, and he's, I think, to me, the greatest defensive mind that football, not just um, not just NFL head coaches, but if you look at head coaches in college and in pros, that Nick Saban has had more impact on defense in pro football than anybody. Uh, Bill Belichick's systems don't spread everywhere quite the same way that Nick Saban's rules and the way he picks things up and the way he accounts for things have spread throughout the league. And so I think, you have about as much chance of getting Bill Belichick as you do as Nick Saban, and each one is about 0.0001. So I don't see that there. Um, and so yeah, it's interesting to see where that is as far as Bill Belichick, but and I keep seeing Ulbrich show up. Jeff Ulbrich. That's another one that I understand why his as a name makes sense, but he's already the defensive coordinator of the Jets. They can't give him a lateral move. Like the Jets will not let him go for a lateral move. It doesn't really matter if he'd be happier in San Francisco. He's not hired there to be happy. He's hired there to do a job, and he's really well paid to do a job. And teams do not like letting coaches out the door. They really don't. Like they don't want to stop people from moving upwards, because that tends to make people not want to come to your organization, because they feel like, if I want to move upwards, I can't. Um, you're going to block me. But teams do not like letting guys out the door. I remember, if you watch, there was a really interesting HBO series on Nick Saban and Bill Belichick, where they get together every year. They're great friends. They've been great friends since Saban was Belichick's defensive coordinator in Cleveland. That they get together and they were talking, and they filmed it for HBO Sports. And one thing that the two guys talked about was that they had never hired somebody directly off the other person's staff, and that Nick Saban said, there, he goes, I don't think we've ever actually formally made a rule on this, or said it. It's just been kind of an unsaid rule, because they both understood the amount of time and everything it takes to develop somebody in your coaching staff and on your staff, and bring them in, invest time and resources into them, and train them up and teach them up, that they never wanted to poach somebody from the other person's staff because of their personal relationship, that they didn't want to step on them and say, look, I know you just spent 6 years pouring in all the work on this guy. I'm going to take him and fill this vacant coordinator position I have. So they'd never done that. And you know teams understand the amount, like they invest a lot in these assistant coaches. These guys aren't just brought in and given a simple job. There's a lot that goes into it, and there's a lot of time and personal investment there. So they're not going to let Jeff Ulbrich out the door go be Shanahan's defensive coordinator when he's already the defensive coordinator there. They're saying, well, look, we have not invested 2 years into you here for you to just go do the same thing that we're asking you to do here within our system and with our players that you already know, and we're trying to build something together here. So they're not going to let him go for a lateral move. So Ulbrich is another. I get why the name's there, but I just don't see it happening. I don't even see the Jets giving them an interview. I don't see Kyle Shanahan even requesting an interview there. It's just going to get shot down. So I think that's where some of these names, just to I get why the connection is there, and I get why why there's interest, but it doesn't have I just don't see there being any real traction to that. And yeah, I know we could maybe get Ulbrich if we gave him the assistant head coach title, kind of like the Commanders did for Bieniemy, is that they gave him the assistant head coach title there as offensive coordinator as well. But I think there was also a situation where he was going to operate somewhere outside of being under just Andy Reid, because there had been, I think Andy Reid and Bieniemy had figured out that, there was roadblocks there because everybody was assuming that everything in Kansas City looked as great as it was just because of Andy Reid, and Andy Reid's there, and so he had to get out of his shadow. So I think there's a little bit different thing there. And look, even if we offer Ulbrich assistant head coach title, what's to stop the New York Jets from denying that interview and giving Ulbrich an internal promotion to assistant head coach as well? So I just don't see it happening. Again, I understand the connection. I just don't see it there. Now, I love Jeff Ulbrich when he played with the 49ers. I remember it was devastating. I think he tore his biceps. It was in 2003 or 2004, I believe. I was in college at the time, and I remember when he tore I think it was his biceps. It was either his biceps or his triceps. I remember he tore a muscle in his arm. Let me know if you remember exactly what it was, but I remember that, and it was early in the year, and I remember he went on IR. That was when guys couldn't come back from IR, definitely, and he was out for the season. But I will always remember my favorite play from Jeff Ulbrich was we were playing the Saints. It was in 2001. Yeah, I believe it was 2001, and they had just traded. The Saints had traded the farm not too much earlier than that away for Ricky Williams, and we were playing the Saints, and Ricky Williams took a ball off the left side and ran into a crowd of 49ers. I think Derek Smith was the first one to meet him, or as Jeff Ulbrich was the first. And Jeff Ulbrich ended up stripping the ball from him in this kind of scrum in there. And the 49ers held the Saints to a shutout in that game. And it was their third shutout of the year, I believe. If you remember that, give me a. Give me something in the chat that lets me know you remember that as well. So I'm not the only one who's got this weird memory going on here. So that brings us to Brandon Staley. Brandon Staley was the other interview that has been confirmed. And again, I'm seeing some pushback from Brandon Staley. And so a lot of people, I think, um are kind of lukewarm at best about him. And so I don't fully understand why. And I've made my comparisons as far as, people are saying, no, we don't want anything to do with Brandon Staley. And so I've made some arguments that, we shouldn't just shut that down. And people are taking that as like I'm saying that Brandon Staley is going to be this guy. But I'm not saying that Brandon Staley is going to be who I'm about to say. My point is, if we had taken the same logic that people are with Brandon Staley now toward Steve Spagnuolo after he was coming off the Rams head coaching job, then everybody in Kansas City would have been saying, stay as far away from Steve Spagnuolo as you can. And that's why I have an issue there, is the logic that is being said, no, we absolutely don't want Brandon Staley, is the same if you apply that logic to Steve Spagnuolo, he is not Kansas City's defensive coordinator. And I think over the last 4 years, that Steve Spagnuolo has been one of the best defensive coordinators in the league. The job that he did against our offense in that Super Bowl was phenomenal. And it was one of those I didn't fully appreciate how good Steve Spagnuolo was until I was watching a lot, and I mean a lot, of Chiefs defensive film. And because I kind of went into it with this idea of, okay, you got these studs, you got a Chris Jones, you got L'Jarius Sneed, you got these guys who are so good at playing man coverage on the back end. Yeah, your job as a defensive coordinator is really easy. You just have these guys play man coverage every time, and they're going to lock everything down. And when you dive into the tape, there was so much more to it than that. He had so many ways of disguising things and bringing all these pressures and knowing, when you see when teams have blitzes off of a certain side and some of the hots and the adjustments that they have and having his guys prepared for that. And that and when the timing of when to play zone, of when to fill certain gaps, and being able to take away some of the things that teams offensively do really well. That is where, again, Steve Spagnuolo, I don't think there's any doubt right now that Steve Spagnuolo is one of the best defensive coordinators in the league. But if you look at his career trajectory, it was very similar to Brandon Staley's. That people, I heard some people tell me, well, Steve Spagnuolo was a really highly regarded defensive coordinator before he went to the Rams. Well, sorta. He had 2 seasons as defensive coordinator in New York before he went and took the head coaching job in St. Louis, and his defenses were good. They were not great. His first year, they were middle of the pack as far as points allowed. They were seventh, I believe, in yards on the season, and then it was 2008, that Super Bowl winning team for the Giants. They were fifth in yards allowed and fifth in points allowed. But the biggest thing, and what probably got him his head coaching job, was that they held the record setting Patriots offense, who coming into that game, that team was undefeated on the season, and they were blowing everybody out, that he held that offense to 14 points. That is what ended up really getting him the head coaching job with the Rams. And then when you start looking at his his defenses with the Rams, they were actually mm, they were mediocre. They were not good. I mean, they were bad to not good. And so some of the things about uh Spagnuolo's defenses when he was in LA. Remember, this is a guy that coached a team that in 2 out of their 3 seasons as with him as head coach, they won 3 games combined, not 3 games each. They were 1-15 in his first year, and in his last year, the year he got fired, they were 2-14. Like, they were a terrible team. And his defenses in those years, points allowed in his first year in St. Louis, at the time at St. Louis, was 31st, and then yards allowed 29th. And this was a guy who was highly regarded as a defensive coordinator coming over to the Rams. And then the next year they went 7-9. Their points allowed, they were 12th. In yards allowed, they were still 19th. Then his last season, they were 26th in points allowed, 22nd in yards allowed. So he was not a good they were not a good defensive team, even with him being a defensive-minded coach and coming from this great pedigree. There was a reason that Spagnuolo has not gotten a head coaching job again. And so, it's one of those things that we look at Brandon Staley and people say, look at the Chargers situation. And it's just what we were talking about with when a guy goes from assistant coach to a defensive coordinator, that the jobs become much, much bigger. And I don't know if we fully appreciate that a guy's defense as head coach is not always just a reflection of their ability to be a defensive signal caller. I mean, just for an example, some of the things that we don't talk about a lot, but again, you know, this is what we do on this channel, is that okay, your job as a defensive coordinator is you're assimilating this defensive staff. And you're responsible for maybe 6, 7 assistant head coaches, and you're responsible for 26 players and getting them to do what you need to be able to do in a given week. That's going to be really about 24 players. That's going to be the defensive side, what they have. So, that's your job. You need to know 24 players, know what they're really good at, and be able to do that and have all that stuff. Okay, and you're going to review some of the charting of busts and coverage, and review defensive practice tape each day from practice, and you're helping to put together the defensive game plan. Well, now all of a sudden you become head coach. And I know people have always said, like when Kyle Shanahan came in, everybody said he should have went out and got a really senior defensive coach that he could have just let run the defense and he didn't have to be involved in. It doesn't really work that way. Even if you have a guy like that, like Sean McVay brought in Wade Phillips. And yes, Wade Phillips ran the defense pretty much on his own, but you still, as the head coach, have to have meetings with ownership. You have to have meetings with your GM each week. Almost every day, you're going to have some sort of meeting with them. You still have to watch your offensive practice tape and your defensive practice tape. You have to be involved. You have to know what is going on. You have to read the scouting reports, which there's going to be now double the amount of pages. That's a lot more information to assimilate. You go from maybe reading 50 pages of scouting reports to 100 pages of scouting reports that now you can't do that. You now need to be working over the analytics reports from the assistant coaches and your coordinators to the head coach on your personnel because you are involved directly with the personnel decisions from your pro player personnel, from your scouting department, from your to your GM. You are the conduit through a lot of that. And so now you have to be reviewing all these things, understanding who is who on the offensive side and the defensive side. You are the head coach. You have to do that. And so these jobs become a lot bigger. It isn't just as simply, well, I'm going to watch all the film starting Monday morning, early in the morning on the opposing team and go through my coordinator process. You have more meetings that are involved. That's less time to watch film. You have more scouting reports to read over. That's less time to read your own and assimilate that, and less time to watch film, and less time to have personal interaction teaching on stuff. And so all of this comes into, how do you make up for you cannot be in as many places at once? Is that now you have to be able to turn over all duties that maybe as defensive coordinator you could handle, but now you need somebody else that's going to be able to do those things. If it's even just putting together certain slides and PowerPoints, that can have an effect on everything. And it has an effect on how they game plan and how they go through all that. We've seen a lot of guys who are great minds as far as coordinators and things that do not succeed as head coaches. And that's a lot of what goes into it. Steve Spagnuolo would be a perfect example. I think Norv Turner would be a perfect example. Vic Fangio would be a perfect example. You see a lot of guys really, really, really good at that coordinator spot. And just head coach, because again, you're adding so much more on top of it. And you're adding so much more to that job. And it's about, how can you bring up somebody to replace yourself in that position, as well as how do you assimilate information, and can you do that? One thing that's made Kyle Shanahan really successful and admirable from a head coach is that he has been doing that on the offensive side, but has had turnover on the defensive side. And in moving from a coordinator to a head coach and still running the offense, that he's able to do all this and still, he knows how to delegate exactly what he's looking for. And there's trust there on, okay, we're going to get out of this information. But they've also had times where it's been really rocky, and Kyle Shanahan's been very open about that. I remember 2021 or 2022, excuse me, going into the beginning of last year, that you had not only the turnover of Garoppolo and Lance at the beginning of the year, but he was talking about the coaching changes that had happened throughout all the years, and figuring out who was really good at doing what. And sometimes that's, okay, we need somebody to do a really good breakdown that's easy for everybody on the staff to understand about a team's second and long tendencies. Some guys are really good at that. Some guys aren't. Some guys, it's better, say, hey, we're just going to have you teach some things. That takes an adjustment period. And so, there's a lot of things that go into this. So just because Brandon Staley did not have a good defense as a head coach does not mean he can't have a really good defense as a defense coordinator. And that brings me to looking at, how good was his Rams defense? There was a reason he was hired as the Chargers head coach. And again, if we're looking at the career trajectory, Spagnuolo, 2 years as defensive coordinator, his best defense was a top 5 defense, and terrible head coach. And then he has been a huge part of Andy Reid's teams being as successful as they are and winning 3 Super Bowls. Um, you know, the way that their defenses have played down the stretch in those Super Bowls have been phenomenal. And so let's look at Brandon Staley's defensive coordinator stats. In 2020, when he was defensive coordinator of the Rams, they were first in yards allowed, first in points allowed. They were they allowed the fewest first downs. They were first in takeaways, first in passing touchdowns allowed, third in rushing yards allowed, third in yards per attempt, rushing attempt allowed, third in rushing touchdowns allowed. They were a phenomenal defense. Absolutely phenomenal defense. And I think people have always said, the thing I've also heard is, well, they had this absolutely stacked team. Of course he was going to do well. Well, did he? Did they really have that stacked of team? People say, well, they had Jalen Ramsey and they had Aaron Donald and you had Byron Young or Leonard Floyd. Yeah, those three guys were phenomenal. Leonard Floyd had 10 and a half sacks. Jalen Ramsey was all pro. Aaron Donald was all pro. But their linebackers, their off-ball linebackers was Troy Reeder and Kenny Young. I don't think anybody's getting really excited about those guys. John Johnson was their free safety, was their leading tackler on the year. Their other corner, other than Jalen Ramsey, was Troy Hill, who was a solid player. He was a solid player. And then their other edge guy was Samson Ebukam, who had 4.5 sacks on the year. It wasn't like he was producing out of this world. There was a reason the 49ers were able to get him for like $6 million a year the next year. He was not a highly coveted guy. And their other defensive tackle was Sebastian Joseph Day, who was a backup for us this year after being released by the Chargers. And he was falling out of favor with Brandon Staley in Los Angeles with the Chargers. So there wasn't like they had, if you look at the 49ers defensive talent this year, the defensive talent on the 49ers this year is a lot better than what the Rams had that year. I would put when you start looking at just our linebacker core, I mean, come on. There is no comparison. Actually, that 2020 Rams defense is more comparable to the Chiefs defense this year as far as personnel, that they got Chris Jones and they got L'Jarius Sneed. Those two big name guys headlining that team and the wreaking havoc that Chris Jones has had. And so, that's when I look at the personnel there, I'm not saying, okay, we got a Nick Bosa, we got Javon Hargrave, you got Eric Armstead. That's a pretty good D line. I would take that over Aaron Donald, Sebastian Joseph Day, Samson Ebukam. That would be up there with. I think you could even say, if you said Leonard Floyd, Samson Ebukam, Aaron Donald, Nick Bosa, Javon Hargrave, and Eric Armstead should, in theory, be a more productive defensive line. The linebackers, you got Troy Reeder and Kenny Young over Drake Greenlaw and Fred Warner. I'm taking our guys all day long. On the back end, I think that's where they have a little bit of an edge. But Mooney Ward has been a very all pro this year, really good player. Diamador Lenore has been as good as anybody in the slot and moving around and doing what he's been asked to do. And Hufanga also was an all-pro guy. Missed him now near the end, but Tayshaun Gibson has been a solid safety. Jair Brown was really productive this year. Had 3 or 4 interceptions coming down the stretch this year. So you look at this 49ers defensive talent. They should have been a lot better defense than they are, and so looking at the way that this is, I think the number one thing that if you're saying, okay, Brandon Staley, we're going to bring you in, is just what Lisa's asking here. Can Staley come in and operate our defense? Now, I think Staley is Wilkes would be, as far as system, the way that the systems work is kind of, Wilkes is that middle point between Brandon Staley and like a Robert Saleh, where D'Amico and Wilkes are kind of, if here's Saleh, here's D'Amico Ryans, here's Wilkes, here's Staley. But it's not as far off as you would think, especially with the way that the defense was moving under D'Amico Ryans. I think Brandon Staley, as far as coverage structure or coverage calls, tends to be closer to D'Amico Ryans. As far as some of the specific calls and things that we ran with Wilkes that Staley would run that we didn't run with Ryans, Wilkes has some of those. So what do I mean by that? Like cover four tricks, for example. We didn't run that really ever with D'Amico Ryans. I don't remember running it with Robert Sala, and that's something Steve Wilkes ran. You can expect to see from Brandon Staley. He's a Fangio guy. That's a Fangio coverage. You would see more cover six. D'Amico Ryans didn't run a ton of cover six. What he ran more was palms coverage, which can look like cover six and can convert to essentially cover six post snap, but it doesn't start out that way. So it's not a traditional quarters, half defense. Fangio is very much quarters, half, and that's what Brandon Staley is. We saw more cover, just straight cover six with Wilkes than we did over D'Amico Ryans. The big question would be so coverage things. I don't see it as big an issue because here's the deal as well is that with Brandon Staley, you're seeing a higher percentage of zone than you are man, or than you would have seen with Steve Wilkes. And that was the thing is D'Amico Ryans ran zone more than anybody in the league in 2022. The 49ers ran zone like 89% of the time, 87% of the time. It was a really high number. D'Amico Ryans ran zone all the time. It was, I mean, and it was we ran a ton of palms coverage, cover three, buzz. We ran a lot of those, and sometimes you'd see Tampa, and sometimes you just see regular two zone. We ran a lot of zone. Steve Wilkes was about 65% zone, 35% man, and the blitz packages looked different. When we were coming with blitz packages, it was almost always man behind it. With D'Amico, it was if we were coming with a blitz package, it was almost always going to be zone, some sort of zone behind it. So I think that's where it's more similar to a D'Amico, Brandon Staley will be, is that you're going to see a lot more zone heavy there on the back end, and I think that plays into the way that our linebackers are used to playing. They're used to being able to read the releases, drop back, use their speed and range to take away the middle, and then close and make tackles from good positions. You're not asking them to go out towards the numbers and cover guys on a two-way out on the numbers against in space and tackle like that. You're just not asking for that to happen. So with those guys, it was more we're going to keep you in passing areas, passing lanes between the numbers where you tackle really well, and I think that's where you're going to see more cohesion with what D'Amico Ryans did versus what Steve Wilkes did. The biggest question will be base front. So Brandon Staley's a 3-4 guy. He's come up under that Fangio scheme and kind of style as a Fangio disciple. And so, Fangio was always a 3-4 guy. We knew that from our time or his time with San Francisco. And then Staley's been a 3-4 guy everywhere he's been. So, how can you do this now? I think if we did that, I think on base you would see probably a transition back to a 4-3 under scheme, as opposed to just straight 4-3. And so the best way the reason I say that is a 4-3 under is basically playing a 4-3 front with 3-4 principles. It also, when you're in a wide nine in base, then you're also playing those edges. Those wide nine players essentially play as outside linebackers in a 3-4. That was straight. Jim Schwartz talked about that. He was doing a coaching clinic somewhere. I can't remember exactly where it was, and he talked about everything into the wide nine. And one of the reasons they did that was because they had these edge guys that really could be outside linebackers in a 3-4. And how do we start utilizing them? And he said, well, let's just have them play as 3-4 guys and take out a nose tackle and figure out how we do that. And so they figured out how to take out a nose tackle, play on the inside with everything, account for everything inside, and allow those edge guys to play as 3-4 outside linebackers. So being a wide nine base defense transition that also has roots in a 4-3 under that they had with Sala, I don't think the transition would be super hard. The question is when you're in base, if you're doing that, where are you putting Nick Bosa? Um, that's a question that comes into play. Now, I think if we look at how if they use Nick Bosa the same way they did Solomon Thomas when he came in, I think Nick Bosa could be really successful. And that is most of the time they use Nick Bosa as the flex side defensive end or Leo in a 4-3 under scheme. Again, if this is me just envisioning if Brandon Staley's there, um, what that actually means, I'm realizing as I'm talking about this, I'm probably not explaining it really well. Let's see if I can draw this up really fast. Um, so a traditional 3-4, you're going to have guys real wide. You're going to, hopefully everybody can see this. You're going to end up with a nose tackle. You're going to cover up the tackles, the offensive tackles, and then you're going to have your two off-ball linebackers. And this is generally, and so what your nose tackle's got to do is he's got to play a two gap. He's got to cover two gaps here. Your five techniques have to two gap and control. That's a big thing there in 3-4, and especially with the way that Staley tended to run it. Now, if we look at 4-3 under, what you end up doing is your you have your big end. It's going to look more like this. So things shift over just a little bit. I apologize for everybody on the audio side not being able to see this. So with a 4-3 under, what you do is you bring what would be your three technique, which is usually outside over the guard. You're going to bring him into a one technique, bring your defensive end in, either play a 5 or a 4-eye, which is on the tackle, and Armstead did that when in Salah's first couple of years, and then you bring your Sam backer over the tight end on the strong side. So front wise is going to look it's going to look similar to that 3-4 you have, and then your Leo is going to be on the flex side. This was trying to remember his name in Seattle that was during the Legion Boom days was out here always wreaking havoc. But Solomon Thomas played this spot when he was drafted by the 49ers. That's how they envisioned him to play. And you can put Nick Bosa there. You put Nick Bosa there. What you need to do is figure out who this guy's going to be. This is going to be Javon Hargrave. Eric Armstead was going to play out here. Who's this guy going to be? When the 49ers had played with this defense, that was DJ Jones. And so DJ Jones was phenomenal in that spot as the one technique. And the other part is these guys now one gap. You one gap everything so that you don't have guys having to or actually it's usually like that over here. So nobody has to two gap. That's a big that it's a little bit bigger of a difference than I think sometimes we fully understand. But I think Staley could make that transition. What I don't want to see is I don't want to see Nick Bosa as a stand-up outside linebacker dropping into coverage 30% of the time. I don't want to see that. I think if anything, you go 4-3, go back to 4-3 under, and you keep it that way. Um, where who becomes that DJ Jones guy? Do they go after that in the draft? Is that Sebastian Joseph Day obviously fell out of favor with Brandon Staley there in Los Angeles. I don't see him as being the guy. We don't have that kind of a guy. And then once you get out of your base, which is again it's about 60% of the time, 60 to 65% of the time you're not in base, then everything really becomes the same anyways. A lot everybody's running some different things there as that. I'm gonna get to Frankie Louvu. I don't see Louvu as a Leo. I think his best time in Carolina, when I remember when I watched their tape last year, he as an off-ball linebacker, I was really impressed. But so those are some of the questions there. Can't believe we've made it on defensive coordinator this long. And Jason's still not here. Don't know what happened. Hopefully he's doing okay. I know he's been really sick, so we'll probably have him on at the end of the week. But as all that to say, Brandon Staley to me, I would be perfectly fine with Brandon Staley being defensive coordinator. I think, I like systems wise, what he brings. I like systems wise what he runs. I think that Fangio defense, and there is the league has had a long track record of that succeeding. Now, obviously, Fangio himself had some issues there in Miami this last year with their corners not being really happy with him and how they did that, which was a little weird too because Jalen Ramsey, was there and he'd played in a Fangio system. I'm not sure. I haven't dived into their tape to see what was different that Fangio was asking those guys to do that Brandon Staley didn't, or vice versa, to see why there were some issues there. But as far as then what does this mean? I think for the 49ers, you absolutely need to make this hire before free agency kicks off because there's some things that you need to start planning for if and really getting into this draft season. Now, the 49ers coaching staff is not at the scouting combine. That was kind of big news. You aren't actually there watching the top prospects in college test. Um, I think they're also looking at it is this needed as much anymore? And this is a fascinating question. The combine has built as an event. It's one of the marquee off-season events, and it's been built up over the years for this. We didn't used to have there's no film of Deion Sanders back at the combine when he was running it. Um, no, it wasn't Cliff Averill. It was the other guy. I'm totally blanking on his name. Michael Bennett. Michael Bennett, that's who it was. But the combine is there's no film of Deion Sanders running the 40 back at the combine when he was there. Or else they would be superimposing that 40-yard dash time over anybody this year, so you can get a good comparison like they do. Here's these guys running the 40 over the years, and they superimpose them and everything. You would be seeing that. Well, the combines become a really big deal, but now all of a sudden with GPS trackers in helmets, do you really need to know a guy's 40-yard dash time? Because there's also a lot of history with the league of 40-yard dash times not always translating to the field. Jerry Rice would be a good example of the negative way. Jerry Rice did not run a blazing 40-yard time in his at the combine, as far as what we're understood. I think the reports were like 4.55 was like his 40-yard dash time. But as Jerry said, when I had a football in my hand, I ran a 4.2. Speed was never an issue for Jerry Rice. And then you have some guys who run that sub 4.3, like a Danny Gray, that doesn't translate over to the field. So now with GPS trackers, you can see exactly how fast guys run on the football field. And you have tons of you know, data on this to say, because just because you can run a blazing 40-yard dash time, that might mean that you're really fast over the first 20 yards. Well, if you're disrupted over the first 20 yards, then that's taken away. And maybe, your high gear is the same as somebody who doesn't start as quickly. But again, the first 20 yards of that route are going to be the same. Well, if a guy, 20 to 40 split is really good when he's on the football field, you're going to be able to see that with these GPS trackers. So I think some of the data that they have from the combine is starting to become a little bit redundant with the data that teams are actually receiving off of these players. They have a mass amount of that. So I think the 49ers are looking at going, okay, we could send our entire coaching staff out there, and they have to travel, and they aren't able to do as much evaluation, and they aren't as much able to do as much as they would here in the facility, and they're away from their families. And so now there's less time that they're going to be able to have for vacation. If they wanted to take a vacation, it has to actually be a vacation away from the stuff we need to get them done when we're just getting redundant information. So, I think I don't think it's necessarily a horrible idea that the 49ers aren't there. This is their second year, I believe, that they're not at the combine. So I think this is just going to become modus operandi for the 49ers going forward, just to not be at the combine. And they really have some things. If we need to figure out who our defensive coordinator is going to be, because you have some free agents out there that are going to be needing to be looked at. Shaq Barrett is getting released by the Buccaneers, and I think that's a guy they need to kick the tires on now. He comes with some red flags. Now, one thing I don't fully understand is that it was reported that they released him for cap relief purposes. The only way I see that being the case is they're going to do it as a post June 1st cut because the Buccaneers have a lot of guys who need contracts. They got Baker Mayfield, they got both their linebackers. They got to pay some guys, and Antoine Winfield, who was the best safety in the league this year, he's a free agent right now. They got a lot of guys to pay, and they have about 40 some $million in cap space. If they cut Shaq Barrett as a pre June 1st right now. Um, Now this maybe not be updated with this year's because of hasn't been the new league year yet, but I'm pretty sure it's for this year. They would actually be negative $12.5 million in cap space. If they do it as a post June 1st cut, they would save about 5 million this year. Because Shaq Barrett only has a $1.2 million base salary this year, with carrying over $9 million in prorated signing bonus, and then $3 million in other bonuses. Yeah, I think they would save some of that, but not all of it. Again, it just doesn't make as much sense. So, but he's a guy that's there now. He's been highly productive sometimes. His best season was in 2019 with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. He had 19 and a half sacks. That's a lot of sacks. 19 and a half sacks, 16 quarterback knockdowns, 14 quarterback hurries. So, really productive. 2020, he was also very productive. The sacks weren't there as much at 8 sacks, but he was still getting the hurries. He had 24 quarterback hurries as opposed to the 14 quarterback hurries the year before, and then 8 quarterback hits in 2021. He had 10 sacks, double-digit sack season, 15 quarterback hurries, 13 quarterback knockdowns. So those 3 years, 2019, 20, and 21, pretty good production. Stellar production 2019, solid production the next couple of seasons. Then he gets hurt 2022. He ends the season with 3 sacks and in 8 games. 8 hurries, 5 quarterback hits. So he's averaging 1 quarterback hurry a game, little less than half a sack a game. And then this last season, he's got 4.5 sacks, 8 quarterback hits, 6 quarterback hurries in 16 games. So there has been a production drop off really starting in 2021. Yeah, he had double-digit sacks, but the hurries weren't as high as the next year. Only two more sacks, 9 fewer hurries. Then the next couple seasons he has not been well. Now, is it some of that lingering injury issues there? Not sure. So, there's questions there. I think if the 49ers wanted to look at him, what he screams to me is a Cleveland Farrell. Is that a guy who is, or Samson Ebicom, who has the potential to be really productive, but has not really proven that recently. So, if he's willing to come in for $3 to $4 million, yeah, it's going to come down to money. But you don't overpay for this guy. You don't pay premier value for a guy like this whose production has been dropping off. Now there was the other thing. Laken Tomlinson is being released by the Jets, so that's another guy very familiar to us who we have know about and was pretty successful in this scheme. The 49ers obviously, let him walk and go to the Jets in free agency, and now they're releasing him. Some of this is cap related. Is that the Jets? I think they're trying to stockpile money for when Aaron Rodgers isn't there. So the Jets, as far as they're not in in a terrible cap situation. They have some money. They have a mostly put together team, but they do save about $8 million by cutting Laken Tomlinson, and he was not really good in pass pro this year. That was part of his issues here in San Francisco. He was not a great pass blocker. If we all remember the game that Jimmy Garoppolo initially had his first high ankle sprain, that terrible high ankle sprain, was when Laken Tomlinson let a guy come free who got on Jimmy's ankle and sprained his ankle. So that's he's been really suspect in pass pro. Now how much of that is also you've had absolutely horrible quarterback play in New York during that time, you know, I think what they're looking at it is that, are you really worth a $19 million cap figure? Because that's what Laken Tomlinson is with his base salary and his prorated signing bonus. Is are they saying we're getting $19 million in value out of you? Or, can we sign somebody or draft somebody for $4 million, have $12 million invested in our left guard situation and get the same sort of production? I think that's what the New York Jets are looking at. I don't know if this is a situation where he was not getting paid, a $19 million cap figure, they would still hold on to him. But, there's questions there. He's 32, maybe he's reaching a point. And again, the Jets are looking at they were really going all in for this year and maybe or last year and maybe this year with Aaron Rodgers because the Jets are they the the Aaron Rodgers contract is interesting, really, when you kind of look at it. He's not a big cap number this season or last season. His cap numbers, last in 2023 was straight eights. It was literally $8,888,888. In 2024, it was just over $17 million. Now, the first year of his first void year, which is the end of his contract in 2026, he's a $63 million cap number. So yeah, there's a lot of money that they have pushed down the road as far as bonuses because he signed a really big signing bonus, and so they've tacked on 3 void years, 2 at $14 million and 1 at $7 million. So he's got a and then everything else kinda stacking up on top of that in other bonuses as well because 'cause he's got $7 million in other bonuses that are attached onto those void years. Um, so they're gonna be hit real hard when Aaron Rodgers does retire and he moves on. So, yeah, they need cap rollover to be able to absorb that when that happens. So I think the Laken Tomlinson release is just as much about cap as it is performance. So again, a guy I think if we looked at it, him and Aaron Banks, I think you're about even there. I don't see an upgrade over Aaron Banks. I would rather see us bring back John Feliciano than bring back Laken Tomlinson. So he's a guy. Yeah, he'll go find work. I don't know if you really need to bring him back to the 49ers. You got Aaron Banks cheaper, so and that was their choice all along. Now, a guy from the Jets that I do think that we should take a look at is Bryce Huff. Bryce Huff, again, I'm looking at how he starts fitting with the 49ers. He was a rotational guy there with the Jets, and his production as far as pass rush when he was on the field was absolutely insane. I I don't think anybody's gonna give him that massive contract because he's not an every down guy. He's a situational pass rusher. But, he's a guy I think they should take a look at. They need to find that edge generation, uh, opposite Nick Bosa. The Chase Young was a guy that was brought in to see if that could happen. In some instances, he did. I just don't know if there's gonna be mutual interest because I think Chase Young going into his this year is gonna want an every down, bigger contract. Than what the 49ers are gonna pay him as a situational guy. Again, Bryce Huff to me kind of screams Charles Omenihu, Arden Key, that situational guy that we bring in on third downs and can be good. Now, if he does start getting a lot of attention on the free agent market, I think a guy that you can look at is Jadeveon Clowney. He's a free agent from Baltimore. He's been productive. He's a guy that you do have to account for. He's given the 49ers fits at times. And, is he going to be a premier edge guy that he was at one point in his career? No. But I think, again, you take a look. You see, is it possible? Again, situational edge guy. That's where I see him as. So they really need to find that. I think they're going to try and bring back Cleveland Farrell off of his injury. I thought as a base D end, he was doing really well. And again, if we're going to go to a 4-3 under, if Brandon Staley comes in, this is why that situation needs to be figured out. You're not looking for your base down lineman. You're not looking for a base defensive end. and a situational defensive end. What you're looking for is a situational defensive end and a base nose tackle. So these things change. And so, I think there's a couple nose tackles there in the draft this year that could be really intriguing. Braden Fisk is one that's really interesting to me. Then the kid out of Texas is massive kid. He's like 360 some pounds. Um, he was also really intriguing as well. And so, Jadeveon Clowney's a guy that I think would make some sense. Azeez Al-Shire is a free agent right now. Now, I don't see the 49ers bringing him back. Um, there's a lot of buzz about that. We should bring back Aziz. I think Dre Greenlaw is going to be healthy. They can't cut him if he's not healthy. He has to be able to pass a physical to be cut. So they're not going to cut Dre Greenlaw. He's pretty much with the team. And then they like Jalen Graham and they like D Winters. So I just don't see a spot for Aziz uh, outside of. I think he wants to be an every down linebacker. He's not going to go and come back and be the Sam and be on the field only 30% of the time, or when Dre Greenlaw or Fred Warner are hurt. He's going to go be a starter somewhere. And I think with the kind of lack of premier linebackers in the league, I think his services are going to garner some attention. A team that makes sense to me for him to go to, even though I hate saying this, is the Chiefs, because Drew Tranquil is up for a new deal right now. He's a free agent. I could see the Chiefs signing Aziz. Another guy I think on the edge that is really intriguing as a free agent is Marcus Davenport. He's been floating around the league a little while. I think that would be another guy I think you bring in, and just like you look at Shaq Barrett, Jadeveon Clowney, Bryce Huff, Marcus Davenport is what it is. And I know Dre, the recovery timetable on that torn Achilles is suspect. Look, Kirk Cousins is moving around really well right now. He tore his Achilles just a few months ago. Aaron Rodgers tore his in the beginning of September and was looking at possibly coming back in December. Some of the way that they've had advancements in medicine and recovering from these Achilles tears are pretty impressive. I remember it was Tarvarius Moore tore his Achilles in OTAs with us, and he came back by that November. It's about a 6-month recovery, so he should be back by the start of the season. And I think just whatever it is the case, I don't think they're going to be planning on him missing 12 games this year. That's not going to be the plan going forward. But anyways, Marcus Davenport's a guy I think you could bring in and and take a good look at and see, okay, are you willing to come in for a 1 year, 2 year, 2, 3, $4 million year contract? And then Leonard Floyd's out there. He's a guy that, again, if Brandon Staley's the guy coming in, I think Leonard Floyd makes a ton of sense as a situational rusher. The guy's just been really productive everywhere he goes, and it seems like every time every offseason he's available. So I'm not sure what the deal is there, but he still keeps being productive. And again, Brandon Staley, Leonard Floyd to make a ton of sense. So I think it's possible free agents to look at as we're kind of gearing up towards that way with the new league year starting here in a little bit, and some of these free agent names, and we're talking about defensive coordinators. I think these are things that start to make sense when you look at it. Now, I think there's a lot of buzz about the right tackle from the Patriots, Owenhu. Uh, I honestly, I don't think we make a big splash there. Just because people, uh, this is not a good tackle free agent class. He's gonna get a lot of money. I really think he's gonna get Mike McGlinchey type money, and the 49ers are just not in a position to be able to invest that into right tackle. I know. Because when you start looking at the 49ers cap situation again, hopefully Jason's doing all right and he's alive and well and with us. Um, they don't have they have some flexibility, but they don't have as many really high paid guys as you would think. They're very top heavy in the cap. I mean, right now they have about 200 or about $300 million in cap spending this year. Is money they're spending on the cap. Now, the cap is $255 million. They have $39 million in rollover from last season. into this season. I love what they did last year of converting some base salaries from last year into prorated bonus and then rolling that excess over because it actually reduces it makes more sense than if they had done some of those this year, like Eric Armstead, for example, um, because it reduces the prorated bonus per season, and so you actually gets more bang for your buck over 2022 or 2023 and 2024 on cap relief and rolling over the excess from 2023. It actually gets you more bang for your buck than if you had done it 2024, if that all makes sense. But the 49ers, as far as cap figures, they they really only have about 8 guys that are over $10 million. And one of those is Brandon Ayuk, who, is looking at we need to get to an extension and reduce that cap number. They're a little over $1 million over the salary cap for under the top 51 rule right now because they have 56 players signed. They have $5 million, or they're over the cap by about $5 million of effective cap space. Now they're looking at restructuring Fred Warner's contract. I think that makes a ton of sense. When you start looking at his contract this year, you can save. I had it written down, but I'm trying to remember what it was. I did all the numbers on it. That they can save a little over $9 million by converting Fred Warner's base salary to like vet minimum, and then giving him the bonus there. So, that gives you another $9 million. You can save around another $10 million with Brandon Ayuk with giving him an extension, which he's due for. And so now all of a sudden you're, in that top 51, you got $14 million in cap space. But if you start looking at some of these cap numbers, you're really top heavy with your first top 5 guys. It's going to be Trent Williams is $31.5 million this year. Deebo Samuel's $28.5 million. Eric Armstead's 28 and just under $500,000. Fred Warner, $24.5 million. These are cap figures this year. George Kittle, $22 million. So that's really top heavy. I mean, your top 5 guys are accounting for well over $100 million, well over $110 million of your cap spending this year. So you don't have a lot of relief in other places because after you get past Brandon Ayuk, you're looking at Dre Greenlaw, Kyle Juszczyk. Talanoa Hufanga is the next highest paid guy, and he's a $5 million cap figure. And so, I mean, are you cutting Hufanga? No, you're not cutting Hufanga, especially not at $5 million. You don't make that much money. Jake Brendel is the next guy. If you start looking at cut candidates, Colton McKivitz is one of your top candidates, and Aaron Banks, and they're just over $3 million. It just doesn't make sense to cut these guys. You get hardly any savings. I mean, comparative to what you're getting from them as a backup. Um, Kyle Juszczyk's been people throwing around him as a cut candidate. It saves less than $5 million. He brings more than $5 million in value to this team. So, where do you have potential to really create some space? Christian McCaffrey, he's got very little bonus. A lot of his bonus was eaten up by the Carolina Panthers. You can sign him to a restructure, create $7 million in space. You know, Eric Armstead, I don't love the idea of that because we do have a lot of his bonus kind of already being spread out over the year. Deebo Samuel makes a ton of sense. He's making $21 million in base salary this year. You can restructure and free up about $15 million. So, the 49ers can create about 30-40 million in cap space pretty quickly. Armstead's not taking a pay cut. I can tell you that. Especially when he went through his game checks last year, and he's definitely not taking a pay cut. Because the 49ers don't have leverage there. If they cut him, they only save $2.5 million, and then they have to replace him. Armstead's not getting cut. But they can create about $40 million, and I think that they're gonna do that this season. And that's where I would like to see them then maybe go after Bryce Huff, Jadeveon Clowney, Mark Davenport, Leonard Floyd. I think those free agents make sense. I think you then also look at defensive line in the I think you take one of those guys and then you go defensive line in the draft. I think this is a very deep defensive line draft class, and you really, really pour into that offensive line. You figure out, how can we do this? There's a couple guys I've been talking about, Charles Turner the third and Kingsley Aguakan. I really, really like them as center going forward. I think they can play interior offensive line. I really want to see us grab one of those guys, and then I think they give the restricted free agent tender to Juwan Jennings, and then I want to see him go draft Luke McCaffrey. I think he would be a fantastic slot for this team, a fantastic slot. Um, He's a super smart guy. I think he fits everything the 49ers do, and he's not going to be a high draft capital guy. He had 1 year as a wide receiver there at South Carolina because he was a quarterback, but football IQ is off the charts. He's a nasty, um, feisty run blocker. Really showed that off at the Senior Bowl. Smooth in his breaks, really smooth in and out of his cuts. Keeps his very little wasted movement. You can tell this is a kid who has grown up playing football and being taught how to play football from pretty much the moment he could walk. And uh, and so there's a lot of things to like about him as far as fitting what the 49ers need and what they do. I think Luke McCaffrey would be a fantastic thing. So, let him come on, sit behind Juwan Jennings. And then when Juwan Jennings can't play under the restricted free agent tender, excuse me, then that's when you look to bring Luke McCaffrey in. And then other than that, I just want to see us load up on offensive line and defensive line this year in the draft. I think it's a decent year to do that. And there's some guys there. Tackle's going to be the big one because it's not as deep in the tackle class. And so where do you get your tackle? That's a question. I'm diving into some of that stuff over the next couple weeks. But with all that, is there any final questions before we wrap it up and send us out of here? This is your moment to speak now or forever, or at least until the next episode. Hold your question. We'll try and reschedule with Jason. Hopefully that'll come in here soon. Still haven't heard anything. I'm really hoping he's okay. I sent him a text, the first text almost 4 hours ago, and sent him a bunch since then. So hopefully he's doing all right. But and so yeah. And now the question here on Armstead is. Ghost says, but Armstead is missing so many games. His injuries are only going to get worse. And yeah, I see that. That's also why I'm not in love with using him as a contract restructure right now, because then if you have to move on or he has to retire because those foot issues are causing him so many problems, I you don't want to be on the hook for all that dead money. So, the contract is what it is at this point. Y- You cut him, you don't gain a lot. You still have to replace him. So, and even if he's only playing 9 games a year, how are you going to replace that 9 games or 12 games of production? We don't. I mean, do we want Kevin Givens as the guy in there? Javon Kinlaw, he was not when Armstead was out. Javon Kinlaw was not a good answer there. So how do you replace this guy? Uh, Now you're looking at, okay, if there's a really premier tackle or a decent tackle there left at the end of the first round, or you need to go try and get a guy who can play 5 technique, which is not as common as what you want, or 3 technique, then uh now what are you prioritizing there? And if you brought Brandon Staley in as your defensive coordinator, you need to go get that nose tackle type. You need to get a DJ Jones type. Well, you're not going to get the same player out of both. So, I understand the thought of it. I just don't know if you can fully do everything around. I don't know. As far as bringing DJ Jones back, I wouldn't be opposed to it. I don't know if the Broncos are going to cut him. I think they're still trying to figure out what they're going to be doing with everything. If he's on the market, if we don't at least put in a call and say, DJ, we want you back in the building. Now, again, the hard part becomes capital allocation. You already have a lot of money tied up in your defensive tackles between Javon Hargrave and Eric Armstead. And again, you can cut Eric Armstead, but you're still on the hook for a lot of money. If they cut Eric Armstead right away, he's going to have something like $26 million in dead money. So, you don't create that much cap space or options there, you're still going to have an incredible amount invested into your defensive tackles and your defensive line in general. So how do you budget this if DJ Jones is not willing to come in for $3 million? Can he go somewhere and make $9 million? It probably can. That's going to be the question there with DJ Jones. So so that those are the challenges you have. And so for me, somebody had asked what my plan is for right tackle. Yeah, I don't know what my plan is. My plan would be you really need to look at every single tackle in the draft. Um, I think that's your best avenue right now. Uh, Now Colton McKivitz was McGlinchey 2.0. You can survive with him, but the biggest issues at the end of the season, especially in the Super Bowl, were not McGlinchey. The biggest or McKivitz. Those were not the biggest issues. For me, the biggest issues was right guard and center after John Feliciano went out, and then getting all of the protection calls right from Jake Brendel and his ability to get to the second level uh, in the run game. He has been very up and down with that. When he's able to do that, the run game is humming. So much of this offense relies upon the center being able to get to the second level. That's why they spent big money on Weston Richburg. Jake Brendel's been sort of up and down with that. He's got the mobility to get to the second level. Here's the problem with Jake Brendel is he's not stout enough to work through disruption to get to the second level in time. So he gets disrupted too many times by the defensive line trying to get to the second level and can't get there fast enough. Weston Richburg had the power and burst to get through that and to the second level. You see a guy like Frank Ragnow. That's again why I'm really high on the 49ers need to prioritize center. I think if you can upgrade there at center, you will see improvement from the tackles because again, your run game does absolutely get better. Big time. Thank you for the huge super chat from Zach Shrout. Huge, huge friend of the channel, huge supporter of the channel. We love Zach. He says for O-line, we needs to draft, get some low-cost vets like Feliciano, and then draft. Yes. If you look at what did the Chiefs do after they lost a Super Bowl and Patrick Mahomes was running for his life? They completely rebuilt their offensive line, and they got like three of those guys through the draft that year. They went out and they looked for guys that fit what they wanted and were really good at that and were willing to invest heavily in their offensive line, and a lot of it was through the draft. They've drafted a bunch of offensive linemen, and they've really invested in that. And they also went out and they signed Joe Tooney. Well, we have Trent Williams. We have our big time signing there. We need to get that in the draft. And for me, that starts with the interior offensive line. Yes, I understand why, there's we need to upgrade from McKivitz. And I'm not saying we don't get a guy in the right. I would love to see us get a right tackle at the end of the first, and then turn around and draft a center, turn around, draft Luke McCaffrey in the third, maybe Braden Fisk there as defensive tackle in the third. I think he's going to be available. Maybe, I don't know. His stock's been rising though. Um, you know, and do that is those sorts of things. As far as the coaching questions, but so anyways, I think draft is going to be your way to go. We love to see the immediate. I guess it's the proven commodity in when you sign a guy in free agency, you can say, okay, this guy over 4 years has done this in the NFL, and so we know he's a good player. Well, Laken Tomlinson, the Jets did the same thing. He allowed more pressures this year than anybody on their offensive line. That's sometimes what you get when you try and do it through free agency. That's again why I'm not as big on signing Owenhu. Like I would just rather see us be able to do that sustainably through the draft, but we have to start investing some first and second round picks there. That's how I see it. But there's a few offensive linemen that I really like. I think as far as lines, this is one of the better draft classes that you have coming out. Now some of the guys that I came away from the Senior Bowl as far as like tackles, impressed with. I've been looking at everything, and all of a sudden, they're projected to go in the middle of the first round and probably are well without a reach of the 49ers, like Talisi Fuaga. People, I didn't know much of anything there, and I went to the Senior Bowl, and I was like, wow, this guy, he's a big guy and he can really move. That's going to be good. And so, uh, then I start looking at draft boards, and people have him ranked as going anywhere from 12th to 17th overall. And okay, that might be not in the cards for the 49ers. Um, but there's I think because of the value of tackles and how hard it is to find tackles, um, they're going to be hard pressed at where they are at the end of the first round. A lot of times at the end of the first round, the best value you get is usually defensive line, because the premier top end defensive line go early, and then you see runs on skill position players and tackles, in a lot of that. So normally, like at the end of the first round, you can get a top four defensive lineman, top 4 or 5 defensive linemen in the league. There. So I mean, just look at what the Eagles did getting Jalen Carter. Now he's all had all sorts of his issues. Nico has a question. Do you think Shanahan can improve his situational awareness? You know, um, it's kind of become the thing for the last few years that there's certain spheres of 49ers content that unless we win a Super Bowl, everything is horrible and everybody needs to be fired and they're never going to do it and they're never going to make it. Um, okay, is Kyle Shanahan without faults? No. Um, is he a guy that you could improve on some things? Absolutely. Is this a situation where all of a sudden people say Shanahan is no longer the guy? I can't buy into that. Um, I mean, look, Bill Belichick got his first job as a head coach when he was 40 years old. He was fired at 43. Um, and people, had kind of said maybe the same thing about Bill, because then he went and was the defensive coordinator again after that. And then when he got hired by the Patriots, he was 46, 47. Can't remember the exact date because of when the exact date of his birthday is. But when Kyle is 44, and when Bill Belichick was Kyle's age, he'd been fired as a head coach already. So I think some of the stuff with Kyle Shanahan is people have to put that in perspective of the success he's had at his age. Um, that a lot of guys do not have even the success that he's had at his age, and a lot of guys who have really, when we talked about some of the greatest names in coaching history, most of these guys do not really see all of their major success until much, much later in life. I mean, again, look at Andy Reid, who is right now the gold standard of coaches and is held in such high esteem, even over Kyle Shanahan. Well, Andy Reid is 65 years old. Um, Andy Reid was fired as head coach of the Philadelphia Eagles 12 years ago when he was 53 and he had lost the Super Bowl. And everybody was saying Andy Reid was never going to do it. Andy Reid didn't win his first Super Bowl until he was 61 years old. You know, Kyle Shanahan's had more success at his point in his career than Andy Reid had. So again, we need to have perspective on where some of these coaches are when we look at Kyle Shanahan. Um, it's we have to have all of them in perspective. When Bill Walsh, famous 49ers head coach, when he was hired by the 49ers, he was doing some quick math. He was 48 years old when he was hired by Eddie DeBartolo as head coach of the 49ers. And he won his first Super Bowl then uh, when he was 51. He was in his 50s when he won his first Super Bowl. Again, Kyle Shanahan's 44 years old. It's not like we're talking about an old guy here. And, some of the best head coaches in NFL history, he is ahead of their growth track. So when we say, do these things need to be improved or whatnot, yeah, everybody can always improve. But if we even go back and look at Tom Coughlin, who won 2 Super Bowls with the Giants, he was 58 when he was hired as the head coach of the Giants, by New York. Uh, yeah, he was not a young guy. He was 58 years old. Kyle Shanahan's 44, and then he won his first Super Bowl when he was 62. So, again, the fun thing right now um, is what the fun thing right now is bag on Kyle Shanahan. He's never going to win a Super Bowl. And he's never going to do it, and he's a choker, and he does all this stuff. Okay, he's 44 years old. He's been to 2 Super Bowls as a head coach, been to 1 Super Bowl as an offensive coordinator, and nobody, can we point to anybody else who's done that by the time they were 44 years old? That's really rare to find. Most of the time in the NFL, in all this stuff, it's the guys who, are in their later years that are seeing a lot of that success. Um, and and so I understand some of the angst, but I think a lot of this is just kind of becomes old hat to me of everything after with Kyle Shanahan is just like it's just becomes passe of or modus operandi during the off season to bag on Kyle Shanahan and everything else there. I just it's not that I'm trying to be a Kyle Homer in any way. I just don't see the point as far as you know. It's like we've wanted to bag on Kyle Shanahan for a long time, and we said all this crap. And then he had a really great season. It seemed like he was about to win a Super Bowl. Oh, yay. And then he lost it. And see, we were right, is what it intends to feel like. And here's all this stuff. And there's just constant negativity about him. And he's not going to find his quarterback. And it's constant negativity about Brock Purdy. I'm like, look, all this stuff is ridiculous. It becomes tired to me. And I avoid it and I swipe past it on Twitter. And so, I've looked like again at his age, where he's at, most of the guys who are were the have we would objectively say are the greatest head coaches of all time did not have the same success that Kyle Shanahan has had at their point in their lives as he is now. So walking away from that or being almost unduly negative about it just doesn't make sense to me. Okay, if Kyle Shanahan's 55, he still doesn't win a Super Bowl, maybe we can talk about it then. I don't know. That's a long ways from now. It's 11 years. I don't know if I could go 11 years without winning a Super Bowl with the way everything's is. But I mean, look, like, and yeah, look at Kyle's dad, as symmetry says. Like his dad was the offensive coordinator of the Broncos, who got blown out by the 49ers 55-10 in the Super Bowl. We had Jesse Zapolo on here last August, and one thing he talked about was we asked him about Mike and what that process was of bringing Mike Shanahan in, and he was like, "Man," because we heard that he was hired. He goes, "We found out about it through the newspapers, and we were like, we're hiring this guy. Like, we destroyed him in the Super Bowl, and you're going out and hiring this guy? Like, this? What is this all about?" But and then he turned around and got fired by the Raiders. So very you could say a very similar idea there with Mike Shanahan. And then people forget that Mike Shanahan, when he came on, had lost the NFC Championship game with the 49ers. And I may be wrong on that. That was according to Jesse. So take it up with Jesse Sapolo if he's wrong on that. So that that sorry, that totally sidetracked me, but some of the stuff with Kyle Shanahan is like, okay, I get it. We didn't win, we didn't get it there, but I mean, again, at the guy's age, he's 5 years older than me, and he has saw a huge amount of success. He hasn't, climbed that mountain, gotten to the peak, but I just don't see is there a better prospect for a head coach right now? I don't see it there. I mean, he's been on the doorstep for so long, like, it's gonna happen. He's gonna figure it out. What you don't wanna do is fire him and then go watch him, like the Raiders did with Mike Shanahan, and then go watch him be one of the most successful head coaches of all time. Because that's what Mike Shanahan did. He went and he won a Super Bowl with us in '94, and then went and won a Super Bowl back to back with the Broncos. So, like, it's just, you know, we're looking at each year, it's one of the top of offenses in the league. Each year, the defense is really good. Like, for each year, last 3 years, this has been one of the best teams in the league. So, um, and people forget that the early '90s 49ers had the same problems. 90, 91, 92, 93. They did not win it all, and they went through a lot of heartbreak. And again, I'll go back to I had Jesse Zapolo on here, and he talked about the ones that he remembers most are actually those 4 heartbreaks that they felt. He goes, I won 4 Super Bowls with the 49ers, and I felt like I should have had 8. That we can sit here, and say, well, yeah, they haven't done it. What if Eddie DeBartolo going into 94 blew everything up? Because, well, it's never going to happen. It's not going to happen again. Well, the '94 Super Bowl never happens. So, it's one of those that I get some of the frustration. I don't get the constant negativity of all this stuff that is never going to happen. I mean, look, at this point, we're in the Mahomes era. Um, it's real tough, but the best you can do is reload as best you can for the next year and go again. It's like what I shared a quote last year from uh early after the Super Bowl from the Bills head coach. Blanking on his name again. Everybody has to remind me every time. Um, but that we're just going to lay here and bleed a while, but we will rise and fight again. That's what's going to happen here. So I think going forward, kick the tires on free agents, invest in the draft, have some restructures, and and everything. And yeah, I mean, if they had lost the '94 Super Bowl, Eddie would have blown everything up. I guarantee you, George Seifert would have been fired. But they didn't, and so maybe this is the last year they really have to give a shot at it. But again, I think some of this also is Kyle's age. Remember he's 44. Um, he's not like the 60-year-old guy who just has proven he can't get over the top. Bill Belichick won 6 Super Bowls with Tom Brady. Remember that. Like, in Tom Brady, he doesn't have 6 Super Bowls without Tom Brady. Bill Walsh doesn't have 4 Super Bowls probably without Joe Montana. And these were guys who, really hit that peak of their career when they were older than Kyle Shanahan is now. So, hopefully Brock Purdy, we're looking everything signs pointing to that he's got his guy. This is Brock Purdy's first starting year. I mean, come on. It's his first year starting. We're acting like he's in his 6th year and all this stuff. He's in his first year starting. They're going to have a great team next year. So, but we will be back at the end of the week. Probably hopefully get Jason in here as he's on the mend from the different sickness and really get a deeper dive into everything. Man, y'all have been fantastic, hanging with me for almost 2 hours. This is one of the longest shows we've ever put on. I just keep rambling on here, but you guys are awesome and engaged. Love the community. Also, you can go to jfa49.com, become a member to support the channel. That really, really, really helps us through this off season and carrying the channel and all the overhead that we have to produce stuff like this. I know it sometimes seems like it's you just put on the hit the stream now button and it goes. There's a lot of other overhead costs that go along with that. And so we really appreciate everybody partnering with us there at jfa49.com. Like I said, I'm going to be working on the next exclusive video here real soon, and we will then be diving into more of the deep scheme stuff that y'all have to see. Kind of like what you saw here. We're just looking a little bit at fronts. We will dive into a lot of that stuff, especially when we figure out who our defensive coordinator is. There's going to be a lot of stuff there. But that's it for this episode. Until next time, stay safe, stay healthy, and go Niners.